Hi, James-Olivia.
Hello, Leslie.
How are you today?
I am thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me on. This is great.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear your story. We begin at the beginning, or at least, whatever we can remember of the beginning. So what religion or spirituality were you raised with? And or what was your experience of that growing up?
That is such a loaded question.
I
Religion or
know.
spirituality. Thank you for making that distinction because they're so different.
Mhm.
Um, I was actually raised in a white Southern Baptist church in California.
Okay.
Um, Spiritually, my religion, I would say, had very, very little to do with my spiritual upbringing.
Hmm.
Um, my family is from all over. My mother's family is from Hong Kong. My father's father was a German Jew who was adopted into a Christian family in America, and as a very, very young boy, grew up American for all intents and purposes, and nobody in the family even really knew he was Jewish till my generation was in our adulthood. And my father's mother was Dutch and Potawatomi, so there's a lot of ancestral um, religion and spirituality that had been erased.
Hmm.
But I think all of that stuff still lives in us. I don't think that we can easily get rid of that stuff. It's in our bones.
Yeah.
Um, and especially when you're looking at faces, it's in our faces too. You can look around and go, okay, I know I'm in a white Southern Baptist church, but all of this doesn't look like me or like my family. um, so both of my grandfathers, my mother's father and my father's father, were Baptist ministers, which sounds even crazier given, and that's how my parents met. They met in a Baptist college in California. So, um,
So it wasn't just that this was part of the religion. This was like a deeply held
oh
part of the
yes,
life.
oh yes, yeah. I was baptized in a Southern Baptist church when I was 8 years old.
Mm.
I mean, the first time I sang in front of a church was I was 5. Like it was, I was steeped in it, very much
How,
steeped in it.
how was it for you? Did it feel good? Did it feel bad? Did it feel neutral?
I think that there were parts of it that felt amazing. I think that there's, um, when you are in your formative years, to belong to something is very safe. It gives you a really great foundation. And then to start developing your own thoughts and asking your own questions and realizing that it's completely out of alignment in some ways with what you understand to be the truth, um, is really disorienting. And that happened pretty early for me. So I think between the ages of like 8 and 13, it was like all unfolding that, hmm, I don't necessarily understand what's happening here. The fundamental things that I've been taught about, Jesus loving everyone, and then Christianity being so exclusionary, and and Southern Baptist religion being even more exclusionary and having such a history of exclusion and racism. And even now as I'm in my 40s, coming to understand um, you know Christianity and colonization for the history that they've had, and coming from Potawatomi ancestry, and coming from um, Chinese ancestry, where missionaries came and made Christians of my family. It's um, at first I think it was disorienting, and then it becomes angering, and then there's sort of a, okay, well, what does this all mean? So now that I understand that this happened, what does that mean? And then, specific to our conversation, what does that mean in terms of my own spirituality?
So that's a lot.
And we don't have to go into all of that in this conversation.
No, and we can. I'm, what I'm kind of curious about is like what happened between 8 and 13 that started to like, what did something happen that started to create this for you? Like you were belonging, you were into it, like, you know what I mean? Like that's what I heard you start to say, like it fulfilled something.
Yeah, I think at 5 years old, it's like, oh yeah, these are, this is like, this is my extended family. I think perhaps as just a function of who I am as a really, really inquisitive person, religion is fundamentally a form of, I mean, if we're just going to lump that in with spirituality, I think it's a really old paradigm of spirituality where it's an authority-led practice. The authority comes from outside yourself. The dogma might be a strong word, but the practices, the rules, the relationship that you have to God, the relationships that you have to other people in your church, those are all fairly prescriptive. And they're based on an external authority. And the focus really is on goodness. In formal religions, most formal religions, the focus really is on, what is good, what is evil, and where do you fit in that binary? And there's a lot of focus, especially for women, because Christianity is one of the most patriarchal practices available to us. There's an enormous focus on obedience, and inquiry and curiosity are ridiculously disobedient practices.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so to have a child's curiosity that grew up into, as a child being, up to 5 or 8 years old, that's okay. You're a kid, ask your questions and we'll give you the pat answers. But it was persistent with me. And so becoming a teenager and then an adult and having always that curiosity really led me out of that old paradigm of, externally led authority based religion and into my current understanding of spirituality.
So was that curiosity encouraged in your house, in your family?
I don't know that it was necessarily encouraged. I don't think it was discouraged.
Okay.
I think it was probably, it's a force with me. And so I don't think that, I'm guessing it was just me and my mom in my house. And I think it was more like, okay, well, that's an inevitability. So we're not going to fight it because it's just going to be a bunch of suffering on all sides.
But still, that's a sweet acknowledgement, right? There's a lot of spaces where that would have been actively stifled. And so that's kind of lovely to me, right? That it may not have been encouraged, but it wasn't actively stifled.
Yeah. I don't think that it was welcomed with open arms, but it definitely was not stifled. Yes.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. So you were raised this way, you had this experience, and then you started really questioning, what happened? So it sounds like Southern Baptism didn't pass the test. Fair enough. What happened next?
For a while, nothing. Just nothing happened. It was baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Like, okay, this doesn't work. And since that was really one of my only exposures to religion, because I was so steeped in it, it's not like I got to, even play in other waters. What I found was that I just didn't want any. It's like, okay, I won't go out and declare myself an atheist, but I don't know what's out there, and if it's out there, I don't know where to find it. If it is, it didn't even occur to me, since I was, raised in this external authority paradigm, that, oh, God could be within it. The divine could be everywhere in everyone, and I could be included in that. That wasn't even a possibility for me at that time as a young teenager.
So then what? I mean, so what happened next? Because you were curious.
Oh yeah.
You have I think what was it that you were described as, a deeply spiritual person? That's how we were.
Someone else's words. I think that was someone else's
No
words.
Pressure. No, that's your description. So I'm totally teasing. So it's what happens next. So you're a teenager, you throw it out, fair enough, right? I think one of the things that's really interesting for me is watching the through lines of all of the different people who I interview.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the purpose of teenagerhood, right? Is to question, to push back, and to make your own. And so most people, whatever they were raised with, kind of got scrutinized
Mm-hmm.
in that time frame, which is good. What do I believe? What is really here versus what's been handed to me? So then you kind of just went about your life. Fair enough, right? And then what happened? Like, what happened? What was your next, do you remember, spiritual experience or exploration or?
I think only in the last handful of years have I become intentional about how I explore and understand my own spirituality. I think it's always been there. And we talked about this a little bit outside this conversation, but the idea that, we're all spiritual, just like we all in this human experience have bodies. So we are all physical. We live in a world where we are subject to physical laws and material things. And so we are intellectual. We have brains. We think, we use them for the most part. We're spiritual, we're material, we're physical, we're emotional. We are all of these things. And so my lack of awareness, or my lack of activity and engagement and intentionality I don't think, make me a non-spiritual person. Just like if I'm not appreciating my body or paying any attention to it or caring for it, it doesn't make me a non-physical person. I still have the body.
Yeah.
So I think I'm blessed to be able to look back now at all of those years and decades in between and go, okay, yes, I recognize spiritual experiences that I had during that time, whether or not I was aware at the time that they were spiritual.
So you wouldn't have called it that. It's not the storyline or the framework in which you held it, but now you can look back and see that going through there.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been exploring a lot lately, and I think will probably become a much bigger focus of my life in the near future, and maybe forever, I don't know. But I don't think it's any accident that I'm having this conversation with you right now at this moment in time, at this point in my life. But you are a relationship coach, and you have this spirituality podcast. And I am an integrative coach. I integrate things. And one of the things I've been exploring so much lately is that the relational is spiritual and the spiritual is relational. And so I might not have had the language to explain these spiritual experiences that I had when I was younger. But when I look back, a lot of them were relational experiences that helped me understand my place in the world, how to feel joy, how to understand connection and healing and all of the things that we look for in spirituality, all the things that we look to spirituality to kind of provide for us, often are relational things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, this idea of starting a podcast and I should only be talking about relationships and okay, whatever. The spirituality is such that I really had this, I think everything is divinely inspired, whether I'm looking at it that way or not. And, I studied Carl Jung for a long time, and at his front door, it said, called or not called, God is present. And I just love that idea. And I remember I had a hard time in relationship, and that's why I do the work I do, because I want to help others with it, right? And I remember just thinking, like, why do I have this deep, deep calling for something that I cannot seem to figure out? And it just was so frustrating. Either give me what I need or stop giving me the desire for the thing. Like, just choose one. And now it's the way I view it is that the healing or the work is in that calling, right? I had such a deep calling for true partnership. Such a deep calling. And the places where I was still stuck, like the deep calling made it so that I was willing to do the spiritual work to get to the other side. I don't know if that rings true for you, if I made sense, but it's so perfectly, like, I just believe that the universe is in alignment for, like, where I'm out of alignment, there's something I really want on the other side of that. Right. And the desire for that is the reason I do that work, the reason I do the shifting and the changing and the surrender yet again. Right. But, so how do you hold this?
Well, now I'm still kind of processing and stewing on what you just said.
Yeah.
About the work that we do to align, and the spiritual work that we do to align, to have the relationships that we really desire. And it works the other way too. The relational work that we do allows us to have the spirituality that we really desire.
Amen.
So, and I love that quote you just said came from Jung, because when I think about these, old paradigms of religion focusing on goodness and obedience, this new paradigm of spirituality is really focused on wholeness and integrity. And it's, his quote, I'd rather be whole than good. And so I don't think that religion and spirituality have to be pitted against one another in a binary. But if I had to choose, I would absolutely choose wholeness, the one that encompasses all of it, rather than the one that it takes a fragment.
But I do believe that at its best, religions do feed people. I have people in my life who are deeply fed by these things. And yeah. And so is there shadow in that, in religion? Yeah. Is there shadow in spirituality? Yeah. Right? I'm going to sit on, I've been talking or looking into how this manifestation work can be really damaging to people of color. Right? And how spiritual white women like me really hurt women of color and people of color with all of the ways that we do that. And I don't want to sidetrack your story, but
this actually is my story, so let's keep going there.
Well, it's just the shadow, right? So then we're going to pull Jung in, the shadow of it. Like everything has a shadow work, right? And this is the shadow work. So yeah, so I guess I want to hear your voice instead of mine.
Well, at some point, I would love to hear more about what you're saying right now, because thank you for bringing it up. That's enormously important. And one of the things that I think as a coach, I've struggled with, even in my training, or especially in my training, in a spiritual coaching program, where there was a lot of spiritual bypassing and a lot of gaslighting, and where I think that we're kind of perched on this cusp of coming from a personal practice and a personal empowerment and personal growth and development to relational empowerment. And when we get into stuff like, when I hear the words divine feminine, I cringe a little bit sometimes. Not because I want to take anything away from the divine or the feminine, but when we talk about, where, white women's spirituality sits in this context, because context really is, we can't avoid it. We're in it. We live in an ecosystem. We live in a time and place. We have history. And if we ignore that, that's what spiritual bypassing is, when we're ignoring the harm we do relationally. But when we're not looking at context, we can say, oh, I really want to embrace my divine feminine. And that's all well and good in a personal empowerment practice where I go, wait, I'm divine, I'm feminine, I'm both of these things. I love this. I want to be all this. And then we ignore the ecosystem and the systems of oppression that we've been conditioned and socialized into, that diminish the divine or diminish spirituality over reason, that diminish the feminine in favor of the masculine. And we're conditioned and socialized this way, and we're fed all of these messages from every direction all the time. And if we're not dismantling that, if we're not able to see our own context clearly, it doesn't matter what we tell ourselves about our divinity and our femininity, because all that stuff is still hiding in the background. That's the shadow. Yeah. Our very context is the shadow.
Yeah. Oh, man. I think that what I really appreciate is this idea of it's the wholeness, right? We're going to go back to the whole. We need the wholeness. And the patriarchy obviously is not working, and we can easily get into that dialogue, but swinging all the way the other way isn't good either. Like you said, we need this. I want to hear kind of I want to kind of go back to the trail, which is, how did you get here, right? So you spent this time that you ignored this piece, right? Or, you can see it now. And then now we just jumped to this incredible other piece.
All the stuff in between. Yes.
Yeah, so was there some big thing that happened that then created this path, or how do we walk me there a little?
The big thing that happened in the middle was a lot of suffering and misalignment. That's the thing that normally gets us from.
It's the only thing.
From being asleep to going, wait a minute, this isn't working.
I travel at the speed of pain. Yes. Yes, I do.
So, I could walk you through all of my 20s and 30s, but I think the major things were the death of my mother 7 years ago, a marriage to and a divorce from an atheist white neuroscientist guy. And throughout that marriage, I think a part of me was always going, why am I triggered every time he says something disparaging about spirituality? Because I didn't think that I had any feelings about it one way or the other. I'm like, people do what they do, whatever. But he would make little offhand remarks, and he wasn't a cruel person. He was a really nice person. But little things like that would just put me off, like just set my teeth on edge. I'd be like, no, what if I am a really spiritual person? Like, what if I do believe in the power of prayer? What if I do care about the ancestors' influence in my life? What if these things are important to me? I've put myself into a context where that's really diminished. And I will not lie, it's not like that was the make or break thing in our relationship. A whole marriage doesn't go downhill from that one thing. But I think the death of my mother and marriage and divorce, and then also meeting my husband now, Ben, who is really one of the most liberated people that I've ever met, and is not bound to anybody's ideas about what should be. Seeing that kind of freedom, seeing that kind of just lack of suffering. It's like, oh, you live in an absence of suffering, and I have made myself a whole world of suffering over here. How do you do that?
Can I have some of that, please?
I would like what you're having.
Hold on one second. I really appreciate this idea that you had something kind of going on in the background, that until someone negated it, you didn't realize you cared about it. Is that what you just said?
Yeah. I didn't know until later that was such a big deal.
Yeah. And I find that that's also true, right? These spiritual awakenings happen in pain and in a loss, when people feel lost. Maybe that's my word.
I would like to also think that it happens. Yes, I will agree with you that for me, and probably the majority of people that I know, that's how it happens. I would also like to think that it's possible for us to come to it through joy and through connection, because that's a really big thing that I don't want to diminish. Is my relationship with Ben is also a really enormous part of me understanding that spirituality is relational. It's not just a personal practice.
So tell me about that. What does that mean to you? Your spirituality is relational and not a personal practice. What does that mean?
I'm not going to say it's not at all a personal practice. I just don't think it's limited to a personal practice.
Yes.
The thing that we talked about just before we started recording, but that mountaintop spirituality, that deeply personal practice that doesn't involve anyone else. And in fact, if anyone else intrudes, it's a disruption into our spirituality. It's like messing with your bliss by interrupting your practice.
Yeah.
I could be so peaceful if life didn't happen, if other people's shit didn't interfere. If other people were more evolved, I could be more deeply attuned to my own spirituality.
As soon as I have these things in place, I will be spiritual. Yes.
Yes. Or I will completely withdraw. And that's something that I've done as well. My husband and I moved to the Sonoran Desert for 3 years and didn't have a social life. And we are very, very lucky to have been able to work remotely. For me to stop working for a few months at a time and do the thing, like sit in the desert and meditate. And it is phenomenal. It's a phenomenal way to practice spirituality that is going to be interrupted by real life when you stop doing it that way.
But I also love the idea that it's both. Like, we're back to this theme of wholeness.
Yes.
That my personal time on a cushion, right? My personal time in meditation and in prayer and in nature is they're all equal, right? Is just as important as how I'm treating you, how I'm treating the waiter, how I'm treating my husband and 3-year-old, right? That any swing in each direction that negates the other piece is not the answer, right? The answer. But isn't, you need the balance, right?
And to be shown yourself.
Yeah.
You won't always be shown yourself by other people. Sometimes you are shown yourself by a sunset, or there's a place for that mountaintop spirituality, but it is not the only way that we are able to commune with the divine.
Yeah.
And not everybody is going to share the same belief that I have. I really do subscribe to the divine being in everything. I really do believe that the divine is in everyone and in everything. And part of the personal practice is being able to be uncomfortable, which translates to the relational practice of being able to be with someone else when we are uncomfortable, because we've practiced being uncomfortable. But there are people and ideas and circumstances that we're not going to love. We just don't love.
Oh, man.
And to me, a deeply spiritual practice is to be able to be in relationship with the world and not have it fuck you up and make you suffer all the time.
Yeah.
My coach, Lena, reminds me, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional.
Yeah. My son just recently got diagnosed with autism. And when that happened, it felt like there's no other answer than pure despair and terror for his future. And I don't feel that way today. And I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not clear what it means. He's very young, la la la. I don't even know what autism means at this point. But I know that this is just it's what you just said, right? No matter what happens, I don't have to suffer. I may not like, I may absolutely say no to what is happening, but it's happening, right? And how am I with the thing that's happening? I mean, that's what you're talking about, right? The relational piece is not just you and I relationally, right? It's relational to every experience we have. I mean, is that what you're saying?
That's a huge part of it. Yeah, that's a huge part of it. Another piece of it, to add to that, is our relationship with everything that we don't know, and also everyone that we don't know. So everything that we don't know is, well, the unknown, the uncertain, that feeling, that fear of, what will my son's future be?
Yeah.
What will my future be? What will our family's future be?
Yeah.
What will happen now? All the things that you can't know.
Yeah.
Which incidentally, we all have about everything.
Yeah, very clear on that.
There are things that we have a lot of certainty about the likelihood of. But there's our relationship with all of the stuff we don't know, which is pretty much everything outside this moment. And all the people that we don't know that also scare us in their unfamiliarity, in our discomfort. And I think that that's some of the places where you were talking about how white spiritual women can do harm to women of color. I don't necessarily think it's only harm to women of color. I think it's doing harm to yourself.
Absolutely.
And I say this, coming from this relational perspective of whenever we do harm, we're doing harm to our ecosystem. We share an ecosystem. And so when we do harm to anyone, we are harming ourselves. We are putting out it might be a slower poison for us. It might be quick and violent and dirty for someone else. It's still a slow poison that we have to breathe, that we have to drink, that it is in our own best interest to stop doing.
Yeah.
So that we can be well.
Yeah. Oh man. We're running out of time. Although I have like this now desire to bring you back and just have you come and chat all the time.
I would love that.
Good. For me, one of the things I like to touch upon is the practicality of a spiritual life, right? Big air quotes. And so I'd love to hear, what does your spiritual life look like, right? What are the practices that you do in this work?
I ask questions. I ask a lot of questions all the time. And I let them change me. I let the answers change me. For me, the practical aspects of a spiritual life are very much in line with the practical aspects of relationships, relational life. A foundational practice that I used to joke about this with people that I would date. I'd be like, it's really simple. Just show up and pay attention.
That's all.
And it sounds so simple and it's so not easy. And I had someone say to me once, you really set a low bar. And I was like, try it. Just try it and come back to me and tell me if you think it's a low bar.
Yeah, interesting.
But I guess you're asking me about my own personal practice, and I would like to, talk theory. So, but showing up and paying attention. I write every morning. That is a spiritual practice to me. So getting up every morning, I grab my cup of hot water, which doesn't sound very yummy, but I like it. And I sit with my cup of hot water and a fountain pen and a notebook, and I just write. I write and write and write until I'm done. Sometimes that's a page and a half. Sometimes it's more. And part of my spiritual practice is conversations with my husband. He is church to me. That is communion for me. Part of my spiritual practice is listening to my ancestors. I look at a picture of my mother's mother. She sits on my desk, my popo, and listen. And that's actually fairly new for me. That's a fairly new practice for me. And it's a big deal. I think that I have always, up until several years after my mom's death, like people would say, oh, does she talk to you? And I'm like, when people die, they're dead. Like, they don't talk to me. Dead people have never talked to me. I know people that dead people talk to. I'm not one of them. And actually last Friday not last Friday, the Friday before, was the 7th anniversary of my mother's death date. And I woke up that morning and I wake up in the morning and there are thoughts in my head. Like the brain starts going, the thoughts start coming. And this thought just was sticking there like a billboard in my head. And it said, you can't fight for everyone until you belong to someone. And there was this thing my mother used to say at the end of every conversation that we would have on the phone. She would say, remember who you belong to. And I always thought she was talking about God, like the Christian patriarchal God, and I would brush her off. I'd just be like, yeah. But, a week and a half ago, I woke up with this thought in my head, and it was the anniversary of her death, and I knew it was her. Like, she was speaking to me, and she was saying, it doesn't have to be the same God that I taught you about, or the same incarnation or expression of God that I understood in my lifetime. But if you want to fight for everyone, if you actually care, if everyone in the world can suffer a little less and feel a little more joy and feel a little bit more connection and be freer and have access to the things that they need to thrive, you have to belong to someone. And that comes with my husband. That came when I met Ben. Also listening to teachers, because I was guided or misguided, I would say, by grandparents and parents whose lineage, whose spiritual ancestry and culture had been erased through Christianity. Finding new teachers has been everything to me. And they're not just spirit, like I don't categorize them as strictly spiritual teachers, but because to me the relational is spiritual, because everything is spiritual, because everything is connected, and you can't, weasel your way out of spirituality or being political or being material. You can't get out of any of these things. They're all connected. There are teachers like Desiree Adaway, like Staci Shelton, like Lena West. There are teachers who, in this case, are all women of color, who are so deeply connected to what is universally true. That I am required to listen to these voices because I didn't get them as a child. I didn't come up with them. And so I have so much learning to do now. So part of my spiritual practice is learning.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear. Thank you. And it's so interesting to hear what you're describing, and it's just different words, right? Like a coach or a teacher or an elder or a mentor.
Very
right?
much.
And we lose that in this culture, this elder, and I need it. I need it for my well-being, and I need to help those younger, right? I need to facilitate both, right? And it is part of this need as a human being, right? We are herd animals. We need each other. And so I love how this conversation has been about the personal and the minute, and how that fact, like these pieces are true, and then they're true in the system. Right? Like you need to belong to your husband, and you need to belong to a community, and you need to belong to it, and that statement can be true as we move out.
Yeah.
I want to say thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, sharing your heart, sharing your experience so honestly and so candidly. And I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to just expose my work in progress self in this way.
Oh man, we are all a work in progress. I might have been doing this for a long time with a very intentional way, but I can show you my work in progress. It's all, yes, there's always more. There's always more.
Thankfully.
Yeah. Yeah. So thanks so much. And so if anyone would like to get a hold of you, all of your information will be in the liner notes. And I'm also going to hopefully we'll get information on how to get in touch with your teachers.
I would love that.
Yeah, to honor them, to really allow, I do believe, to follow the sparkly path, right? And so for me, if anyone listening hears a name and says, ooh, that one, and it could be you, it could be me, and it could be any number of your teachers, right? And I just want to make sure that everyone listening gets that opportunity to find these people, especially if you're driving or walking in the woods or doing whatever you're doing while you listen to a podcast. So you can find that in the liner notes. We will get together and make sure that's all there.
Great. I wish them on everyone. I wish them on the world.
Yeah. And your voice too, right? We all have a place in the community. I really, yeah.
Thank you for this.
Yeah, thank you. Bye for now.